After the explosion in the battle between Fear and the priest, Simon cleverly lured the Kizen guards to the battlefield. He also commanded Fear not to pursue the priest and to return to him. When Fear returned, Simon explained how he had used the guards to create a diversion and expressed his concern for Fear's well-being. Fear assured Simon that he could handle the situation and that they needed to focus on helping Cammy, who seemed to be in more immediate need of assistance. Simon asked Fear if he could heal wounds, to which Fear replied that he couldn't but that they needed to escape quickly. Fear then carried Simon and Cammy to safety, dashing away from the battlefield. Once they were at a safe distance, Fear explained that there was likely a wide-range detection spell cast in the area, making it unsafe for him to approach further. Simon thanked Fear for saving their lives, and Fear expressed his attachment to Simon as their newly formed contract and said he couldn't lose Simon already. Fear departed, and Simon wished him well. Simon now had to decide on his next steps. He couldn't risk taking Cammy to the central ward because they'd be asked how she got hurt, potentially revealing their dangerous encounter with the traitorous priest. Instead, he decided to go to the dorm caretaker, seeking her assistance. When he arrived at her door with Cammy in his arms, the caretaker was taken aback and asked him what had happened. Simon implored her for help. The dorm caretaker was initially surprised by Simon's request to bring Cammy into the boys' dorm as it was forbidden, hesitated but ultimately agreed when she saw the urgency of the situation. She asked what had happened, and Simon, while unable to provide details, earnestly requested her help in treating Cammy. Simon promised to explain everything later and begged the caretaker to prioritize Cammy's treatment. The caretaker consented and instructed Simon to lay Cammy down for her to assess the injuries. As the caretaker examined Cammy's wounds, she noticed that most of the injuries were minor, consisting of light scratches and bruises. However, one of the wounds appeared to be a deep cut from a sharp object. She inquired if this had resulted from a fight with other students, but Simon insisted that they hadn't fought and apologized for not disclosing more details. The caretaker agreed not to press further, emphasizing that students at Kizen often did whatever they could to survive, even if it meant hurting themselves or others. While treating Cammy's wounds, the caretaker also attended to Simon, checking his injuries. She stressed the importance of health and well-being, hinting at the tough nature of Kizen and the need to prioritize one's health. Simon expressed his gratitude to the caretaker, acknowledging her assistance. She assured him that it was her pleasure and advised him to return. The caretaker arranged for a trusted staff member from the girls' dorm to take Cammy back to her room. After Simon left, the caretaker pondered how long he would last at Kizen, noting that he was a rare type to see there. Simon returned to his dorm late at night, and Dick, relieved to see him, hugged him tightly. Worried about Cammy, Dick asked if they were both okay, to which Simon reassured him that they were fine and told Dick to calm down. He explained that they had been chased by the guards and got lost. He inquired about Malin, and Dick replied that he had been chased by the guards too and explained that he had informed Malin about the guards, and she suggested postponing making the potion until the next day. As they prepared to sleep, Simon's thoughts lingered on Cammy's reaction to the previous night's events. He thought he was used to seeing someone praying as his mom was a priest, but Cammy. He couldn't help but contemplate the shock she must have experienced. He decided that he should talk to her privately the next day. The following morning, Cammy greeted Simon with a smile, looking as though nothing had happened the night before. Simon asked if she was okay, and she reassured him that she was fine. She mentioned that the previous night felt like a dream, starting out pleasant but turning into a nightmare, hinting at the shocking events of their night out. Simon thought as she thinking the whole thing was like a dream because it was so shocking. It's a good thing if that makes it easier for her to handle the shock. Simon later pulled Cammy aside and discussed the situation with her, explaining that the priest had fled after encountering the guards. They might have seen Simon's face but not hers. He advised her not to reveal what had happened and to act normally. Cammy expressed her eagerness to help, and Simon agreed but emphasized that there was nothing to investigate immediately. He assured her that he would ask for her help if needed. In the Caterology class, Professor Bahil introduced the day's topic, addressing the students' reliance on correction devices in their previous exhaust class. So in this class, they will practice with an easier curse. This remark seemed to hit a nerve with Simon, who had struggled during that class. Professor Bahil went on to explain that they would be working with the transfer curse in this session. He described the curse's foundation as being the formula that granted darkness to the targeted object and emphasized that the goal for the day was to float a magic circle in the air without relying on a correction device. The plants in front of the students would bloom when infused with darkness, and their task was to use the transfer curse to make the plant bloom. As Simon struggled to create a perfect magic circle for the transfer curse, he experienced frustration and disappointment. His friend, Dick, noticed Simon's struggle and asked if he was okay, to which Simon admitted that he was not. Concerned for Simon, Professor Bahil approached him, grabbed his shoulder, and asked how he was handling the situation. Simon listened to Professor Bahil's advice and admitted that he was struggling to create the magic circle. In response, Bahil offered guidance, suggesting that Simon use his core. Bahil explained that Simon's inexperience in core operation was affecting the solidity of his darkness, making it difficult to form a proper magic circle. He noted that core operation was a fundamental skill, but it was challenging to teach, as everyone had unique methods of operating their core. To assist Simon, Bahil cast a sensory curse, enhancing his senses. Bahil highlighted that curses could be a valuable tool for guiding and helping students, not just for causing harm. He instructed Simon to concentrate and explained the process of running mana through his core. Simon closed his eyes and focused, attempting to follow Bahil's guidance. As Bahil continued to explain the importance of developing mana circulation, Simon realized that his darkness was unique and needed a different approach to core operation. Simon followed Professor Bahil's instructions, focusing on his core and allowing the darkness to flow naturally. As he concentrated, his core grew larger and more stable. Bahil encouraged Simon to think of his core as a living creature and to soothe it, allowing it to lead. Once Simon successfully conjured his core, Bahil praised his progress. He then reduced the sensory enhancement to 50%. Bahil provided Simon with a valuable tip, explaining that darkness had a tendency to remember its flow, much like a habit formed through repeated actions. He emphasized the importance of practice in developing good habits. With his core now formed, Bahil suggested that they try casting the curse. Simon agreed, and Bahil encouraged him to complete the magic circle as he saw fit. Simon conjured the magic circle, and once it was perfectly formed, Bahil instructed him to activate it. The darkness flowed into the plant, transforming it into a tree. Simon's successful display of power surprised the other students in the class. Bahil commended Simon, highlighting his unique and special darkness. He encouraged Simon to consider how best to utilize his talent and in which direction he should proceed to harness his special darkness to its full potential. Simon was eager to improve further and asked Professor Bahil for feedback on the curse he had just cast. Bahil praised Simon for his objective self-assessment, which demonstrated his commitment to self-improvement. However, Bahil pointed out that the curse needed more emotion. He mentioned that emotion played a crucial role in black magic, emphasizing its importance in spell casting. This startled Simon, and he couldn't help but wonder why Bahil's expression had turned so scary during the discussion. Dick, seeing Simon's success in the class, also wanted to improve his skills. He requested assistance from Bahil, but the professor encouraged him to keep trying and not rely on luck or being spoon-fed. Malin was forcing himself not to laugh at Dick and Cammy notice it. After the class, the next subject was magical combat. During magical combat class, Dick discussed with Cammy how professors seemed to be favoring Simon lately. He mentioned Professor Bahil's kindness and how Simon had mastered the transfer curse, possibly due to this favoritism. They observed Professor Hongpang, who was giving Simon special attention by teaching him the perfect stance. As Simon received an exclusive lesson from Professor Hongpang, both Dick and Cammy couldn't help but observe how the professor seemed to be giving him special attention. Simon practiced under Hongpang's guidance, focusing on the pivot and kick. Hongpang provided constructive feedback, pointing out that Simon needed to improve several aspects of his stance, gaze, lower back usage, and the control of his darkness when making a hit. Simon accepted the critique gracefully, and Hongpang acknowledged that he was doing well overall. Meanwhile, Malin was approaches Dick saying he doesn't have to be jealous of Simon, just try harder and get into the professor's good graces instead of holding grudges. Dick replied that he was not holding a grudge, he merely posed a question, and Dick mentioned that Malin was branded a problem student for lifting the exhaust curse in the last class. Cammy witnessed another argument between Malin and Dick. As Malin became frustrated, she turned her attention to Simon, seeking his help in improving her skills for the upcoming performance assessment, where she had to fight against the Cyclops. Simon agreed to teach her and instructed her to get into the proper posture. Malin was grateful for Simon's assistance. When Malin takes a posture, Simon says, "You're a mess." She replies, "I know that," while blushing. As Simon continued to help Malin with her stance and kick in magical combat class, it became evident that she lacked confidence and was quite stiff in her movements. Simon provided detailed guidance, instructing her to relax her body, maintain the correct posture, clench her fist lightly, and concentrate the darkness around her waist. Malin struggled with her kicks, and her frustration was apparent. Dick, who was observing the situation, couldn't help but comment on Malin's difficulties. He expressed his surprise at her struggle and apparent lack of skill in this area. Despite Malin's frustrations, Simon remained patient and continued to teach her the proper techniques. He emphasized the importance of using core strength, focusing on form, and controlling the darkness. Malin called out, ordering Simon to touch her for a hands-on lesson, and her words were overheard by the rest of the class. The students remarked that Malin had requested Simon's touch, prompting murmurs among them about whether Simon and Malin were in a romantic relationship. Simon decided to clarify the situation. Simon touched Malin's legs and says, "So. You gather the darkness here, and as you turn, you move it here." Malin was surprised and said it was not the right time when a misunderstanding to arise. Simon replies that it's better to stay cool than lash out to deny something if she wants to clear up the misunderstanding. Malin blushed and agreed to focus on improving her skills. Simon resumed teaching, demonstrating the correct movements and encouraging Malin to concentrate on the darkness where he had indicated. Malin attempted a 45-degree kick with her eyes closed but ended up stumbling and falling. Simon checked if she was okay and offered words of encouragement, acknowledging her progress. The other students who had witnessed the scene cleared up the misunderstanding, acknowledging that Simon had merely been teaching Malin the proper posture. Some female classmates approached Simon praising his teaching and expressing interest in receiving instruction from him as well. Malin, who was still on the ground, looked somewhat jealous as the other girls sought Simon's guidance. In the Sonology class, Professor Aaron introduced the topic of restoration and demonstrated the process by restoring a rat skeleton with a simple beckon of his finger. He explained that the restoration was made possible because even when a skeleton's body was scattered due to a strong shock, its bones still retained residual darkness. By activating this remaining darkness and maximizing the property of attraction, the bones could be pulled back into their original structure. The students in the class began practicing the restoration technique, with some struggling and others appearing overwhelmed by the concept. Simon, on the other hand, was initially engrossed in reading a book. Malin approached Simon and questioned his relaxed demeanor and whether it was okay for him to be slacking off. In response, Simon casually beckoned his finger, demonstrating the restoration technique by instantly restoring his skeleton. Simon flashed a peace sign with his reconstituted skeleton. Malin seemed impressed by Simon's skill and playfully mentioned that he shouldn't get a big head just because he was good at restoration. She then reminded him of a promise he had made. Simon assured Malin that he hadn't forgotten the promise and was determined to outperform her, no matter what it took. Malin acknowledged his commitment and reminded him once again to keep his promise. Malin expressed her frustration to Simon, mentioning that she could have scored 9 in Sonology if she could have solved question number 20. Simon seemed surprised and asked which question she meant, specifically mentioning the exam they took during Professor Jane's class. Malin confirmed it was the question on the last page and then asked Simon about his answer to question 20. Simon confidently replied that he had answered 1,200,146. Malin was taken aback, and she demanded to know how he had arrived at that answer. At that moment, Professor Aaron appeared behind Simon, seemingly having overheard their conversation. Simon quickly explained that he was looking ahead at the next lecture's material after successfully restoring the skeleton. Aaron wasn't entirely convinced and instructed Simon to stay behind after the class was over. After the Sonology class, Aaron led Simon outside the school building while still on the school grounds. He expressed his annoyance with students who didn't pay attention and learn from his class. Simon apologized, but Aaron decided to test Simon's restoration abilities. He asked Simon to summon his skeleton and then promptly destroyed it. He challenged Simon to restore it in front of him, which Simon successfully did. After witnessing Simon's skill in restoration, Aaron says, "Fine, I see that you're greatly talented in restoration. Then, I'll teach you a skill above restoration." Simon was confused. He asked, "Weren't you going to reprimand me for not paying attention in class?" Aaron says, "What are you talking about? This is an extra lesson. Aaron provided Simon with an extra lesson and explained the importance of professors offering additional guidance to students who excel in their regular classes. Simon was deeply touched by Aaron's gesture and couldn't help but admire him. Aaron then instructed Simon to get into position for the lesson. He introduced a unique aspect of this lesson, demonstrating a skeleton made from the bones of a demon. Aaron used the skeleton to showcase a powerful attack skill that utilized restoration magic. By pointing his finger, he disassembled the skeleton, sending its bone parts hurtling towards a tree, creating a bone-piercing attack. The tree shook from the impact, scaring a nearby squirrel. Aaron continued to demonstrate his skills by using the bone parts to encircle the squirrel, creating a bone prison. Finally, he also showcased a defensive skill by commanding the bones to form a protective bone armor around himself. Simon was clearly impressed by the display of power and skills demonstrated by Aaron during this extra lesson. Simon says that it was so cool. Aaron explained to Simon that depending on a necromancer's capabilities, the skeleton could serve as a weapon, a prison, or armor. The skills he had just demonstrated were applications of restoration magic, which Simon was already familiar with to some extent. Simon acknowledged this and thanked Aaron for his guidance. Aaron then explained that they would focus on the bone-piercing skill. However, before they could proceed, Aaron pointed out a habit that Simon needed to correct in his restoration magic. He explained that the key to restoration was to send the skeleton to the intended location from the start, rather than relying on moving a fully restored skeleton afterward. Simon realized that this was similar to what Fear had mentioned earlier. Following Aaron's instructions, Simon attempted to restore the skeleton in front of him. Aaron noted that it wasn't terribly slow, and they moved on to the next skill, bone piercing. Aaron emphasized that restoration and bone piercing were two distinct skills, with the latter being an application of restoration magic. To achieve a piercing effect, Simon needed to tilt the bones during the restoration process so that the sharp ends would dig into the enemy's flesh. Aaron demonstrated how to use the bone as a sharp blade by focusing the darkness on it in one direction. He also showed that bones without piercing parts could be used to bind an enemy effectively. In a practical demonstration, the skeleton's tail ensnared Aaron, showing the binding effect of this technique. Simon was learning valuable skills and techniques from Aaron, eager to master these necromantic abilities. Simon tried what Aaron demonstrated. He clenched his fist commanding the skeleton to attach to a bamboo and he broke it. He says it worked. Aaron acknowledged his progress but also reminded him that he was still just choking the enemy with the bones at this point, but since he can repurpose the destroyed skeleton as an attack, that gives him a new card to play. Aaron says to keep training it so that he can use it in the actual battle. Simon expressed his gratitude to Professor Aaron, and Aaron noted that Professor Jane had chosen Cyclops hunting as the performance assessment. He asked if Simon was going to fight. When Simon mentioned that Malin, his teammate, would be going out to fight, Aaron praised the decision and emphasized the importance of supporting one's teammate. He also reminded Simon that the extra lesson was merely additional training. As the afternoon turned into evening, Aaron took his leave, and Simon thanked him once again for the valuable extra lesson. Simon was back in their classroom. Malin, Dick, and Cammy were concerned for him. They thought that Simon was being punished for not being attentive in class. Cammy said it's still the student protection period. How cruel of him to punish you physically. Dick says I heard physical punishment at Kizen starts with whipping. Malin blamed herself, saying if only I hadn't mentioned question number 20. Simon urges them to calm down. Simon says it wasn't a punishment, it was just an extra lesson. The three became silent. They were relieved to learn that it was actually an extra lesson and not a punishment. After calming down, they shifted their focus to their potion-making task. Malin proudly showed the potion they were working on, and Simon expressed his confidence in her skills. Cammy chimed in, we all worked so hard on this. I hope it's effective. Dick says, oh, since we're all here, let's prepare for tomorrow's presentation. Team 7 discussed their presentation tomorrow and reviewed the expected questions. They got all 300 of the expected questions and they have responses for all of them. They were all tired but still cheered, saying go, team. The next day they present their presentation to Professor Jane. Professor Jane's feedback on their presentation took the team by surprise. She pointed out that their roles within the group and their combination of black magic lacked creativity and that their approach was quite conventional. The team had anticipated hundreds of questions but none of the ones they had prepared were asked. Professor Jane began the evaluation of Group 7 by asking about their role distribution. Malin responded, explaining that their primary goal was to defeat the Cyclops quickly and efficiently, prioritizing this over clearly defined roles within the group. Jane acknowledged, "That means these positions are the best formation for your group." Simon, feeling the need to impress, clenched his fist. Jane then turned her attention to Simon, asking for his opinion. Simon realized that there might be a specific answer Jane was looking for, but he also understood the importance of the student protection period presentation. He decided to focus on showcasing their teamwork. Simon stated, "First, I'm aware that our group lacks creativity in terms of combining black magic. But what's more important than creativity is safety. We'll hunt the Cyclops in a more stable manner than any other group and, in doing so, earn high marks in our respective strengths to make up for the points we lose in creativity." Jane agreed, saying, "If you say so, fine. Let's discuss the next point." She then addressed Kamiber as Ursula, a hematology student who had given up the attacking position to a catarology student. Jane asked, "You're the student of hematology and thus will need to be taking charge of attacks. But I see that you've given up the attacking position to a catarology student, and you're supporting with cursing instead. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this." The group found this a challenging question and silently cheered for Cammy. Cammy explained, "It's due to the unique nature of the Cyclops we'll be fighting against. The Cyclops has tough and firm skin. Hematic spells are more effective with physical damage, so it's not easy to defeat the Cyclops with hematic spells. Malin knows how to use Dark Flare, a darkness elemental spell, so I think we can burn the Cyclops alive with Dark Flare. That's why I thought Malin was more appropriate in attacking the Cyclops." Jane understood the reasoning and then asked Cammy what she would do if they faced a different monster. Cammy boldly replied, "In that case, I'll be the main dealer." Simon and Malin were amazed at Cammy's newfound courage, while Dick was equally impressed, though Cammy herself seemed a bit shy. Finally, Jane turned to Dick Hayward and, instead of discussing their group presentation, scolded him for chatting with the student next to him during class. Jane then moved on to the next group, Group 8. After class, the students went to the cafeteria, engaging in various discussions about homework, confusing lessons, and what to drink. Simon was waiting for someone and thinking about when she might arrive. He was eager to see this person today, no matter what. Suddenly, someone was approaching, and the students started whispering and murmuring about her. It was Lorraine Archbold, and her presence seemed to intimidate some of the students. Lorraine asked Simon if he had something to say, and as she approached, students were nervously watching them. Simon couldn't help but wonder why Lorraine seemed different now, as he recalled her friendly and approachable nature before entering Kizen. They had even gone shopping and had a meal together in the past. Simon greeted Lorraine, and her demeanor suddenly shifted. She asked how he had been, and it was the first time they had seen each other since Langerstein. Simon responded that he had been good. Lorraine then showed Simon a letter and inquired about what he had told the girl who delivered it, mentioning that she had been quite excited. Simon explained that he had merely asked the girl to pass the letter along to her. Trying to change the topic, Simon complimented Lorraine on how great she looked in the school uniform, even better than he had imagined. However, his comment seemed to backfire, as Lorraine became angry and asked if he thought she looked old. Simon quickly clarified, saying that he meant to convey that she looked like a professional necromancer in Langerstein, and seeing her in the school uniform felt different. Lorraine laughed it off, assuring Simon that she was just joking and that there was no need for him to get nervous. Their conversation continued, with a bit of playful banter. Lorraine asked Simon why he wanted to see her, and he proceeded to share the details of the situation with her. He explained that there was a traitor in Kizen, and in Professor Jane's class, they had to face Cyclops. Simon recounted his journey into the Forbidden Forest to create a potion to use in that class. He shared everything that had happened in the forest, acknowledging that it might be hard to believe but assuring Lorraine that it was true. Lorraine expressed her belief in Simon's story and inquired about the cross he had mentioned. She asked for a detailed description, and Simon recalled that the largest cross had a woman sculpted on it, wrapped in vines. Lorraine explained that the woman on the cross was Diva, the goddess, the only deity that priests of Efnel believed in. Efnel operated directly under the Pope, much like how Kizen fostered necromancers. She added that the saintesses from Efnel were considered the strongest in the Holy Federation, and they held significant power. As Lorraine spoke, her anger became evident, and she pressed her glass tightly until it shattered. She expressed her outrage at a priest setting foot in Kizen. Lorraine asked Simon who else knew about this besides him, to which he replied that it was just him and Kamibarez, who had accompanied him to the Forbidden Forest. Lorraine assured Simon that she would report this to her mother, emphasizing that it was a wise decision to inform her. She explained that if Simon's account was accurate, the priest in question must be high-level and powerful, perhaps even as influential as a professor. This meant that every professor in Kizen was a potential suspect. Reporting to her mother would ensure an impartial and thorough investigation. Simon expressed his relief that he could help, and Lorraine enthusiastically suggested they go to the Forbidden Forest to investigate. She believed there might be evidence left at the scene where Simon had witnessed the priest. Simon agreed, and they set off to the Forbidden Forest. However, when they reached the exact location where Simon had seen the priest, there was nothing there. Simon insisted to Lorraine that the spot they were in was the location of the altar and cross he had described, but there was no trace of the battle between Fear and the priest. Lorraine examined the area and found no evidence, which she considered suspicious. She expressed shock at the priest's determination to enter Kizen despite serving God. Priests believed that opening the core would deny them access to holiness. Simon inquired about the consequences of opening the core and not being able to use holiness. Lorraine confirmed that using the holiness as a priest would be impossible after opening the core. The holiness, which came from believing in God, clashed with the darkness, viewed as the force of a cursed devil. Lorraine tapped Simon's shoulder and expressed her concern, suggesting that he take some time off to rest due to the danger he was in. However, Simon was determined to continue with his daily life as normal, fearing that any break from classes or unusual behavior would raise suspicions. Lorraine was concerned and said, "Don't be ridiculous, Simon. Even if we can get evidence, it's meaningless if it's in exchange for your life." Simon urges her to calm down and he explains that if he took a break or acted differently, the priest might suspect him. Even if the guards followed him, it would make him stand out and reveal that he had informed Kizen's higher-ups about the events of that day. Simon stressed the unpredictability of fanatical priests and their potential actions. Lorraine reluctantly agreed but made Simon promise that if she detected any suspicious movements, she would ensure his protection, even if it meant limiting his freedom. Simon agreed to the promise, and Lorraine emphasized that he didn't need to sacrifice himself for everyone else. As they finished checking the area, they decided to return to Kizen. When night came, Lorraine bid farewell to Simon. In his thoughts, Simon contemplated the risk of taking a leave from school and falling behind other students. He couldn't afford to be expelled due to low grades and lacking skills, and he was determined to maintain his school life. He acknowledged the importance of learning in Kizen, as Fear had told him. The next day, the students gathered at one of Kizen's facilities. Dick says that he heard that students usually experience this in the second semester, but they were doing it before the student protection period ended. Professor Jane introduced them to the virtual battle simulation system known as Avalon. This system allowed Kizen to recreate any monster as a magical creature for virtual battles. It was a unique asset that Kizen possessed in the entire continent. Professor Jane explained that the rules of the virtual battles were the same as the actual performance assessment, and each student would experience a maximum of 3 virtual battles before the real match. The fighters would wear vests with a barrier spell, and when the barrier gauge reached 0, the training would end. Students would then wait in a designated waiting room to get a sense of how the actual battle might unfold. Group 5 was assigned to their simulation battle, and Dick noticed that Cindy was in this group. Simon thought about the balance of their group, which consisted of students specializing in catarology, darkness dynamics, toxicology, and spiritology, with the spiritology member as the fighter. Professor Jane commenced the simulation battle for Group 5, and when they entered the field, a Cyclops appeared. Cindy confidently conjured a scythe using her darkness magic and initiated the battle. However, after 1 minute and 16 seconds, Group 5 had only dealt 22% damage, resulting in their failure in the simulation battle. Watching from the sidelines, Dick and Cammy noted that the Cyclops was more challenging than they had anticipated, and the curse needed to be cast faster. Professor Jane called for the next group, which included Group 3 and Group 7. Hector approached Simon and asked if he was the fighter in his group, but Simon clarified that Malin was the fighter. Hector made a sarcastic remark about Malin's background, to which Simon defended her as the best fighter among them. As they prepared for the simulation battle, Professor Jane explained that Group 7 would take on the supporting positions. They would be hidden from the Cyclops, but leaving the yellow circle would result in disqualification. Simon expressed his concern for Malin, but Dick reassured her not to be too nervous, as it was just a virtual battle. They encouraged Malin, and she appeared ready to face the challenge. Professor Jane announced the start of Group 7's first simulation battle, and the Cyclops approached them. Malin, as the leader, instructed the group to get ready and asked if they remembered the strategy. The group confirmed their readiness, and Simon thought that Malin appeared to be handling the situation well. He focused on his role, summoning 2 skeletons, while Cammy prepared a magic circle for the battle. However, the Cyclops' attack was swift, taking everyone by surprise, including the summoned skeletons. Malin was defeated in a single strike, leaving the group in shock and confusion. Simon and the others asked if Malin was okay, concerned for her well-being. After their first virtual battle, Professor Jane commended Group 7 for carrying out parts of their initial plan. But they all looked weary from the battle. She noted that the summoner, Simon, had managed to draw the Cyclops' attention with the skeletons. However, she pointed out that other group members had fallen behind overall. Professor Jane emphasized the importance of proficiency, encouraging the group to minimize misses when casting spells. Group 7 thanked their professor. In another simulation room, Hector's group was victorious in their virtual battle, defeating the Cyclops in just over 4 minutes and dealing 100% damage. Their total evaluation was an A, and their barrier gauge remained at 98%, indicating that they hadn't taken a single hit from the Cyclops. The other students observed Hector's success, wondering if they could achieve the same. Hector walked past Simon with an arrogant smile, prompting Malin to rally her group and encourage them to win in the real battle. As they entered their second trial, Dick provided instructions to Malin, suggesting that she should dodge the Cyclops' attack. Malin agreed to try, and they focused on using the persistence formula to stack up curses on the Cyclops. They began to cast curses, but Malin slipped and fell during the battle. Unfortunately, their second trial concluded with 42% damage dealt. The virtual battle duration concluded in 3 minutes and 45 seconds, resulting in a total evaluation of E. Cammy acknowledged that their next attempt would be their last, and the group prepared for their final trial with determination. In their third and final attempt, Simon came up with a new plan to ensure their victory. The basic strategy remained the same, with 2 curse casters and Malin casting Dark Flare. However, Simon introduced a more complex element to their plan. He instructed Cammy and Dick to use a 4-layered exhaust spell with multiple incantations. While Dick expressed uncertainty about performing multiple incantations, Simon assured them that he would buy as much time as possible with the skeletons. They decided to use the terrain and Dick's specialty, enchantment, to enhance their strategy. As the third trial began, Simon's summoned skeletons climbed the Cyclops, diverting its attention. Cammy and Dick started casting the 4-layered exhaust spell, and Malin worked on Dark Flare. The skeletons continued to distract the Cyclops as it climbed, and Simon summoned a 7th skeleton. When the Cyclops was within range of the exhaust spell, they released the 4-layered exhaust followed by Dark Flare. Simon instructed Malin to dodge the Cyclops' attack, and she followed his lead. As Malin dodged the Cyclops' attack, Simon told her to run ahead, and Dick started casting the exhaust spell again. Cammy used a hematic spell to block the Cyclops' view, and the summoned skeleton pulled a chain to choke the Cyclops. Simon directed Dick to use enchantment to secure the chains. With the Cyclops struggling and its vision blocked, Malin was ready to finish it off. She conjured a powerful Dark Flare, causing the Cyclops to fall to its knees and then to the ground. Their simulation was a success, with a duration of 6 minutes and 48 seconds, 100% damage dealt, and a barrier gauge at 97%. The total evaluation of the simulation was a B. The group celebrated their victory, having overcome the challenge together. After their successful virtual battle against the Cyclops, Professor Jane commended Group 7 for their innovation and adaptation of a strategy that had initially seemed theoretical. She acknowledged their ability to turn it into a practical approach through real experience, but also pointed out the need for improvement in their battle time and over-reliance on the summoner's capabilities. She encouraged them to practice and enhance their black magic skills. The group thanked their professor for the feedback and advice, feeling motivated to continue refining their strategy. In the waiting area, their classmates praised Malin and her team for their performance, with Cindy high-fiving Simon and expressing her admiration. During their conversation, Hector continued to harbor resentment and frustration, a common sight after their successes. After Professor Jane's class, the students were preparing for their next class in Darkness Dynamics. While discussing their plans for practice over the weekend, Simon learned that Cammy had turned down a date to focus on training. Malin was surprised. However, Dick had a business meeting in Roche, and Simon had personal training plans for Sonology with someone in Roche. This disappointed Malin, who seemed frustrated with Simon's reasons for not practicing with the group. Simon explained that he was trying to make up for the preparation lessons he had missed and had enlisted the help of someone in Roche to teach him Sonology. Over the weekend, Simon visited Fear for training. Fear greeted him, and Simon immediately requested that Fear take a look at his skeletons. He explained that he had several skeletons that needed to be incorporated into the battalion and required many weapons for distribution. Fear inquired about the injuries sustained by Simon's skeletons, to which Simon explained that they had been damaged during the recent simulation battle. Fear examined the skeletons and pronounced them all good as new. Following the inspection, they began their training session. Fear suggested using a human-type skeleton for the training and explained that they would focus on teaching Simon how to control multiple skeletons effectively. Simon mentioned that he could currently control a maximum of 2 skeletons at once, and attempting to control more led to confusion. Fear assured him that the number of skeletons controlled was not as important as the skill in doing so effectively. They decided to focus on controlling 2 skeletons at a time during their training. The training began with a sparring match using their controlled skeletons. Simon's skeleton charged at Fear's, resulting in a clash. Both Simon's and Fear's skeletons took turns attacking, and Simon's 2 skeletons were eventually defeated. Simon protested, believing that they had agreed to use only 2 skeletons at a time. Fear clarified that they had used only 2 skeletons simultaneously, just as Simon had requested. However, what made the difference was the technique of cross-operation, where the control was rapidly shifted between the 2 skeletons, effectively widening the scope of limited control. To demonstrate the concept, Fear controlled the skeletons in a cross-operation pattern. Simon observed and grasped the technique as Fear explained its significance in managing multiple skeletons. Fear then proposed a real battle to help Simon master the cross-operation technique, and Simon eagerly agreed to the challenge. Their goal was for Simon to become proficient in cross-operation, a key strategy for controlling multiple skeletons effectively.
The scene shifts to Group 7 training and practicing.
After their training, the group took a well-deserved rest. Dick expressed his exhaustion, but Malin complimented the team's progress, especially Simon's improved control over the skeletons. Cammy agreed with Malin's assessment. Malin noted that Simon could now control 3 skeletons, which was an improvement from his previous limit of 2. She asked Simon about the source of his improvement and whether he was being taught by a professional necromancer or someone affiliated with Kizen. Cammy also expressed her interest in learning from Simon's teacher, given his rapid progress. Simon revealed that his teacher was someone introduced to him by his father. Malin and Cammy were intrigued and expressed their desire to learn from Simon's teacher, believing that the person must be a great master of black magic. Meanwhile, Fear communicated telepathically with Simon and jokingly mentioned how popular he was among the group. Simon requested that Fear keep a lower profile, as his head was hurting. Fear humorously offered to teach Malin and Cammy if they died and became part of the battalion. Simon explained that Fear rarely had time for such lessons. Malin became a bit upset and called Simon petty. Dick intervened, explaining that Simon had good reasons for not revealing too much about his private lessons, as he couldn't afford to get lower grades than Malin. Malin fired up and suggested they practice together for the next week. The following day marked the end of the student protection period. In their next class with Professor Bahil, many students faced expulsion. Professor Bahil reprimanded students for submitting subpar work and expelled a large number of them on the spot. Simon asked Dick how many had been expelled, and Dick reported that it was 20 students in a single day. The situation in Kizen seemed to be getting more challenging, with students under immense pressure to excel in their studies to avoid expulsion. After Professor Bahil's class, the group had their next subject, magical combat, taught by Professor Hong Pen. Despite the tiring run to the class, Dick expressed his enthusiasm for this subject and his love for it. He questioned why Professor Bahil had deducted points from him, and he seemed determined to excel in magical combat. Dick wondered why Malin can keep up now, as she always fell behind. Simon expressed concern for her well-being, suggesting she should not overexert herself. Malin suddenly sped up and left them behind. Dick was exhausted and asked for help, realizing that the performance assessment was the next day. Simon thought about Cammy's previous conversation regarding practicing with Malin and how she had focused on physical training all day. Cammy had mentioned that Malin took an awakening potion and studied all night without sleep. Reflecting on Malin's dedication to schoolwork, Simon wondered why she put so much effort into it. However, his thoughts were interrupted as Malin called out to him, asking him to watch her. She leapt using the darkness at her feet, springing off of it, demonstrating her improved abilities. Cammy and Simon were amazed at her progress, and Cammy clapped in admiration. Malin asked for feedback, and Simon told her she had done exceptionally well. Malin was happy with his response and said it was worth the effort she had put into practice for the upcoming performance assessment. Simon was impressed by Malin's rapid improvement over the past few days. He reminded her not to overexert herself and assured her that they had already passed the simulation. However, Malin was determined not just to pass but to secure first place in the upcoming assessment. After the break, Professor Hongpeng led the students to run without any rest. Simon seemed concerned for Malin, who had already been pushing herself hard. Hongpeng approached Simon, asking about his progress with the darkness operation. Simon confirmed that he had been practicing and had improved since he first learned it. Hongpeng acknowledged his progress, noting that Simon's overall capabilities had also enhanced. He complimented Simon's strength and suggested that he was born to major in magical combatology. However, the teaching assistant informed Hongpeng about an injured student with a sprained ankle. Concerned, Hongpeng went to see the injured student, and Simon turned his attention to his group mates, Cammy and Dick, asking if they had seen Malin. They hadn't, and they were all worried about her. When Professor Hongpeng checked on the injured student, they were shocked to see that it was Malin, being carried by the teaching assistant. They were deeply concerned for her well-being. The scene shifted to the school clinic, where the doctor diagnosed Malin with a severely sprained ankle. The doctor recommended that she use crutches for a while and abstain from participating in hands-on classes requiring physical activity for a week. Malin protested, claiming she was okay, but the doctor insisted that it was not a suggestion but an order and that her recovery was the priority. Malin apologized to everyone and requested some time alone. Simon spoke with her, encouraging her not to wallow in self-pity. Malin was frustrated, especially about the upcoming Cyclops battle, which they had been practicing extensively. She felt responsible for any potential negative impact on Simon's grades. Simon reassured her and made a decision, telling her that he would be the fighter for their group in the battle the next day. The next day, as the students walked to the dungeon where the Cyclops fight would be held, they marveled at the numerous dungeons and ruins in the area. They discussed how Nephthys seemed to collect these ancient ruins and bring them to Roke Island, considering her a collector of such sites. Simon and Malin walked together, with Malin using a crutch to support her injured ankle. Some of their classmates murmured and whispered about their situation, feeling sorry for them. Others were more focused on the potential impact on their own teams, stating that a team member's injury could ruin their chances. Cammy asked if they would be okay, and Dick reassured everyone, saying that they should trust Simon. Despite Malin's injury, they remained determined to face the Cyclops battle. As the students continued to talk about Malin's injury and the fact that Simon was now in the starting lineup for their performance evaluation, Simon reassured his group that they should give their best effort until the end. Professor Jane announced the start of their performance evaluation, reminding them that they didn't need to push themselves too hard, and they could ask to stop the exam if needed. Group 7 acknowledged her instructions. When the exam began, Simon summoned his 3 human-type skeletons, and the Cyclops prepared to attack. He commanded his skeletons to attack, but the Cyclops targeted Simon directly. Simon dodged the Cyclops' powerful swing and noticed that the Cyclops was focusing on him rather than the skeletons. Dick and Malin were preparing the exhaust spell, and they discussed the difference between the simulation and reality, noting that the Cyclops was acting stranger than the simulation. Simon continued to dodge the Cyclops' attacks and used his human-type skeleton to strike the Cyclops from behind. He realized that the Cyclops' skin was much tougher than in the simulation, indicating that the real battle was more challenging. As the Cyclops entered the exhaust range, Dick and Cammy released the exhaust curse. Simon took advantage of this opportunity to leap towards the Cyclops, using what he had learned in his magical combat class. He ejected a spear into the air and threw it at the Cyclops, cutting its face, but it wasn't a decisive blow. Simon landed safely, and he thought to himself that if he hadn't learned to control the darkness, he would have been defeated a long time ago. He expressed his gratitude to Professor Hongpeng for his training. The Cyclops continued to attack Simon, and he skillfully evaded its consecutive attacks. However, there was a moment when the Cyclops caught him off guard and prepared to smash him. Simon tried to dodge, but the Cyclops managed to scratch him, causing the barrier gauge to reduce to 72%. Simon and his group were puzzled by this, as it seemed strange that the Cyclops had resisted the exhaust curse even though other teams had successfully used it. The teaching assistant reported the issue to Professor Jane, suggesting that they stop the test and bring in a new Cyclops. However, Professor Jane decided to continue watching and stated that fairness was not a crucial virtue in Kizen. She emphasized the importance of learning from experiences and trusted the students to handle the situation. Simon was also concerned about the Cyclops' resilience, and Dick wondered how many hits it would take to stop it. Simon suggested giving up on the curse, as it didn't seem to be working. Meen disagreed and insisted that the other teams had succeeded with the exhaust curse. Simon proposed changing their tactics and approaching the problem from a different direction. When asked how to proceed, he simply told his group to do whatever they wanted and forget the previous tactics. He expressed his readiness to adapt and said, "Just help me however you want." With Simon's new strategy in mind, the group sprang into action. Cammy prepared to support Simon while Dick threw a weapon for Simon to use. Simon's skeleton caught the swords and attacked the Cyclops from behind, creating a coordinated assault. Cammy used a hematic curse to block the Cyclops' vision. Simon focusing on Professor Bahil's teachings. Simon concentrated, summoning 9 skeletons simultaneously. In his mind, he felt grateful for Fear's assistance. Simon commanded his skeletons to engage the Cyclops, and they attacked from various directions. The skeletons threw a spear, causing the Cyclops to growl in pain. The onlookers were surprised by the sudden change in strategy, as the group improvised a new plan. Hector, who had been watching the battle carefully, acknowledged their efforts, saying, "Not bad for something like that, huh?" However, Simon felt that he could do better and remembered Fear's words about infusing strong emotions into the undead. He focused on commanding a skeleton with strong negative emotions, repeating the word, "Kill him," in his mind. The skeleton became more ferocious, and their classmates watched in amazement. The Cyclops growled but continued to chase Simon relentlessly. As the Cyclops prepared to strike, Meen intervened by casting the darkness elemental magic, Dark Frost, creating a protective wall of ice that shielded Simon. Meen encouraged him not to stop and to keep going, instilling determination in Simon. The Cyclops exerted force to break the ice wall, but before it could reach Simon, Cammy used a spell called the Ursula Hematic Magic, causing blood to overflow in the Cyclops' veins, creating immense pressure. The situation intensified as the group pressed on with their unique and improvisational strategy. As the battle continued, Cammy felt weakened after using her powerful spell, and Dick offered his support. Cammy encouraged Simon, reminding him that it was all in his hands. Simon, determined to finish the battle, used the restore attack he had learned from Professor Aaron. He created bone nails that pierced the Cyclops' body, causing the students watching to express their amazement at his skill. The Cyclops, weakened by the attack, sat down, groaning in pain. Simon realized that their efforts might be in vain unless it resulted in the Cyclops' instant death. He requested the Narvia potion, which Meen threw to the Cyclops' wound. The potion was working, but the Cyclops still showed signs of getting up. Simon thought that they needed an instant solution and asked Dick for an enchanted weapon. Dick threw an enchanted sword to Simon, cautioning him that the enchantment would only last for 10 minutes. Simon understood and thanked Dick for his assistance. With the enchanted sword in hand, Simon engaged the Cyclops once more. However, during the battle, he suddenly staggered and fell to the ground, exclaiming that he had no strength left in his legs. Their classmates, witnessing the intense battle, cheered for Simon to get up and urged him not to give up. Professor Jane, who had been observing, stood up as well. The chapter ended with Simon on the ground, looking at the approaching Cyclops, and the outcome of the battle hanging in the balance. Did you enjoy the story? We'll continue with the next part once updates become available. What are your thoughts on Professor Jane? I can't help but wonder if she might be the same traitorous priest Simon once battled in the Forbidden Forest. Please consider liking and subscribing to my channel for regular content similar to this. We greatly value your thoughts and suggestions, so feel free to share them in the comments. Your support and feedback inspire us to create more entertaining videos just for you. Thanks for watching. Peace.